Hello and happy Friday, everybody. This is There's No Crying in Crochet. We are the podcast where we take your everyday crochet frustrations and try to give you some solutions. I am Biz from Bizzy Crochet, and this is my cohort.
Debbie from MadameStitch.
Welcome, everybody. We're so glad that you're here, and thank you for joining us today. All right, so just let's get some business out of the way. If you are following us on YouTube today, make sure that you lick. Oh my God, you can lick it if you want, but I
Let's
was
not
going
say we did.
so
Okay.
well. Oh my God. Okay, you like and subscribe on YouTube for notifications. I'm at Bizzy Crochet. Deb's at Madam Stitch Crochet. Make sure you follow both of us for lots of videos and tutorials that we're starting to show on there. If you're streaming on Facebook, please give StreamYard permission to see your name so we can see your name as we're chatting in the chat. All right, Miss Debbie, what is up this week? What you been up to?
Well, once again, lots of crochet because I have a big project that's coming out as a Cal in October, so I'm getting all the stuff done.
Yay.
But this was the first week of school for the boys, for the
Oh,
grandsons, and if you don't know already, I spend Tuesday, Thursday afternoon picking them up from school, feeding them, just hanging out with them. But as it turns out, the younger one has Little League Baseball and the older one has marching band practice, both on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And what I discovered this week, holy cow, between parent pickup and coming back to my house and then dropping them where they need to be, I am running around all over the place. I am so tired today from
I bet you
running
are.
them around. They're just all over the place. But you know what? I wouldn't have it any other way. They're such cool kids. And, we've already seen our first Little League game for the fall. So it's just been a really fun start to the school year. But of course, I'm behind on my work, but that's all right. I'll catch up over the weekend.
Well, and now that I'm
today's Daisy's birthday.
Oh, happy birthday, Daisy.
Yeah, my little puppy dog. My puppy dog.
But being freshly part of the Grandma Club, it is such a privilege to be able to spend that time with them. And I was telling you because I've had a rough week getting my work done too, because I said, there's this baby vortex in my house. Like, I pick her up in the morning and then all of a sudden it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon and I haven't gotten anything done because I've just been loving on baby all day. So I've got to stop doing that. I've got to actually be productive. So we'll see how that goes. But I know that I had briefly mentioned last week that I was in pivot to change my schools. I am completely signed up at Southern New Hampshire University, yay, for my bachelor's instead of the local college for my associates in the same degree. So I'm actually kind of digging that it's a one step up as far as my degree is concerned. And I only have 2 electives that I have to finish, which this week is starting English and history. And then I get to just jump right into my degree. So I'm really excited about that. And other than that, it's really just been that and Baby Vortex that's all I've been doing.
Yes, but you also changed your office around. So everyone look at her
Oh, I did.
background. It's very yarny,
I
very
flipped
yarny.
it so that you don't have to look at my stupid calendar anymore.
We don't mind.
Yes. So, but I just, I got tired of having my sloppy background and I thought, I've got this beautiful yarn wall on the other side of my office. So I asked Tony to help me on Saturday just to my desk is in an L shape, so we just flipped it and went the opposite direction, and I actually kind of like it better because there's more space.
Perfect.
Yeah. So this week, though, we are going to be talking and continuing our conversation about granny squares. This is the last of our granny square episodes because it's the last Friday in August, and that has been August has been granny square month for us. So this week's topic is going to be granny squares versus motifs, but not really a versus, but are all granny squares motifs? So that's
Are all motifs granny squares? The great debate.
Yes.
Right?
So we are going to I did going off of our notes, what is a granny square to you? And that's going to everybody. So like, feel free to
Right.
throw it in the chat. What is a granny square to you? And so,
Right. When someone says granny square, what do you think
mhm,
of?
yep,
Right.
yes. So what do you think of, Deb?
Well, as you may know, I'm a purist. And
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to granny squares, I'm not a purist in my entire life. This is not how life works. But as far as granny squares go, I'm a purist. That means a true granny square is one that is the traditional basic. It's 3 double crochets worked in the spaces, um, and there's not a whole lot more to it than that. What does a granny square mean to you? What do you think of?
So until I met you, everything to me was a granny square. If I could get it,
Oh, see,
if it
I
was
told you this was going to be lively. What? Okay,
because
I need to leave the studio now. I'll see you later. You guys all have a good. No, just kidding.
I'm not kidding.
What?
Because like back in the day when I was putting together, like I would start with a circle and then I'd make it into a square, but it was all double crochet all the way around. There was no granny stitch in there at all. It was, just a square. So I would call it a closed granny square because it had no holes. And then I met Deb and I went, oh,
Well, let me
I went,
rethink
oh,
that.
so a granny square is not everything that you put into a square. So, all right, we've got a couple
Well,
of
now
different.
we just need to make sure that we quantify that a little bit after we see some comments. Just
Yes.
make
Dawn
sure
says
that
3 double
everyone
crochet
who's
together.
watching,
So that would
right? That's a
qualify as
granny stitch.
the granny stitch, yeah. And
Hmm.
so when you're thinking of the granny square, it's most people are going to think of the old-fashioned one where it's the open spaces in between the little clumps of 3 double crochets
Right.
together. All right. Let's see. We're gonna just do a real brief granny square history.
Little bit because we've talked about it before, but I
Mhm.
thought it might be fun to look at how the granny square itself started so that you understand why I'm the purist. Others may not be. And I want to quantify all of this by saying this is my opinion. My opinion only matters to me, not really to everybody else, but I do it from an informed place. So it's
Yes.
not like it's not a granny square, but I'm going to give you the information so you understand where I'm coming from. All right.
I'm gonna pop
So
this up
our
here.
great debate
Yeah.
is granny squares versus motifs, right?
Mhm. Yes.
So um, the granny square kind
I'm
of
sorry.
came
I'm
on this
fussing with my
team.
screen here.
You're fine. Um, is Now I know this is hard to see, and so I want to just make sure everybody knows that if you can't see it very well, go to full screen, but that the text is too small to really see. So our first iteration of the granny square is by Mrs. Phelps, and it was published in the Prairie Farm magazine in 1885. So that's really the first time we saw the granny square.
Mhm.
It's sort of a misnomer. I've been party to spreading this rumor that it was started because it was there yarn was scarce, but that's not really true. Everybody spun their own yarn, so they actually had it because they raised sheep and wool producing animals, so that really wasn't why it started. Mrs. Phelps decided that she wanted to do this thing called crazy art. I don't have any idea what crazy art was from that time period, but she called this her crazy Afghan square.
Okay.
And what she says in here is, this is really cool. I've been trying a new crocheted pattern for an Afghan, which is on the principle of the crazy work so popular now. Nobody really knows what that crazy
We're
work
gonna have to look that
was.
up.
I've tried to find it, and maybe I
Really?
just didn't look hard. Yeah, it's made it. I think she goes on to either describe what she's coming up with or what the crazy work is. We'll see.
Okay.
It's made in strips of the desired length, and with 2 of the blocks, which I have brought, forming the width. The long strips are crocheted together with a double chain stitch, and she's double chain stitch. I'm not really sure what that means. With it, which is twisted and of any 2 desirable colors. So that she might be talking about the double crochet. The small blocks can be sewn or drawn together so as to make a perfect square. This joining being done on the wrong side. Very specific about her joining.
Right.
The idea is to have the blocks appear as one straight strip. And then she goes, use Germantown wool. None of us know what that means, but parenthetically, the editor in this particular article says that it was the top US yarn brand at the time.
Okay. Okay.
And all of the blocks were finished off in black. So
Okay.
have you ever wondered why all of the Afghans that you see in the 70s shows, or the ones that are set in the 70s, are all black with bright colors in them?
So
It's
I
because
guess
this
I just
trend
had
started at the end of the 19th century.
right. I was gonna say I just assumed that it was because everybody was on drugs and everything was psychedelic. You know,
No,
that's
no,
what I
no,
seriously thought
that's
it was
not
just
it.
so it would like show up in a black light room.
Well, I actually would agree with you if we're talking about a trend that started in the 70s, but no, this was actually, if we look at the next slide, this is
Oh,
the one,
sorry.
oh, wait, I actually got control back. So if
Woo!
we look at the granny square that we know today, the basic
Uh-huh.
granny square, was done by Mrs. Niles. And we don't know whether Mrs. Phelps got remarried and got a brand new last name, or if this is another person who just did her own thing. But this was published in The Art of Crocheting in 1891. And this is the one that we kind of know from today.
Yeah.
So all groups of 3 double crochet.
Yeah.
And Mrs. Nile was the one who said in some article that all the squares had to be finished off with black. So
Okay.
that's where the trend came from.
Oh
And
my
then
gosh.
it just disappears from publication until the 30s. It's just
Wow.
nobody talks about it at all. So
You know, that's so funny.
crazy.
It's like the trends, when you think about mid-century, how all of a sudden, I want to say 10-ish years ago, the flat front chinos, the shoes, the rolled up jeans, that
The
really
bell
50s,
bottoms.
yeah, the 50s clean look, and the A-line
Oh yeah.
skirts and the shirtwaist skirts, and that kind of style really came back. And it's funny how this stuff just falls off completely for like almost a generation. And then all of a sudden somebody goes, "Oh, I found this thing," and they bring it back.
Right. Well, think about the cycle. 1930s is almost 50 years after the first Granny
Sure.
Square, 40 years, right? And then 40 more years to the 70s, and then 50 years now to this resurgence. So it's just kind of got this life cycle of several generations,
Yeah.
which
It's
is
almost
kind of
like they have to
cool.
wait for the old stuff to wear out, and then all of a sudden somebody goes, "Oh, I don't have anything in a granny square anymore. I've got to make one."
Now we can exit out of that while we do the rest of our discussion, because we'll come back to
Oh,
these
okay.
in just a second. We can bring us back.
Yeah, I am figuring out how
And
to put
I
this
want to
on.
ask you, Biz, do you
Mhm.
know why it's called a granny square?
No, I do not. I honestly don't. I just figured
Well,
old
nobody
grannies.
really knows. So that's actually the correct answer. Nobody really knows. It's just we kind of surmise that it's a nickname because grannies love to make them. So it's Granny Square.
Yeah, and all the
But
blankets used to
that,
be made by grannies.
right, Mrs. Phelps and Mrs. Niles did not name it the Granny Square. That's not how it came on the scene. Just saying. So
Oh, okay. Oh, and you know what? That is actually a question I missed, so I'm just gonna hit it so that I can say I hit it. So, what is a crochet motif then?
Well, actually, a crochet motif can be any small piece, regardless of its shape, that's sewn into a larger project. So you can do circles, triangles, squares. In fact, we were talking about books. I have
Yes.
this one. And in it, it has, if you look at the back, it's got stars. It's got,
Yes.
oh, here we go. Hexagons, circles, all kinds of things. So motifs are smaller pieces that are sewn
Mhm.
into a larger piece, like a blanket or a garment or a scarf or anything.
Mhm. And so I would think that just saying you've got a pair of ripped jeans, you could take a little motif and sew it as a patch over your ripped jeans or something like that. You could do it with granny
Exactly.
square too, but I always
Mhm.
think of oddly shaped things going in stuff like that. Have you ever
Yeah.
seen people take all of those really odd shapes though and put it together like a free form?
Yeah, well, freeform crochet is a thing. I've never tried it. So
Me
I
either.
would think that would be a form of freeform crochet where you just took a bunch of shapes and then crocheted them together as the
Mhm.
spirit moved you.
Well, and I know that Irish crochet is motifs and forms that are then crocheted together with like a webbing in between. And it's
Mhm.
very particular. And it's quite beautiful and very ornate, most of it. But those would be considered motifs as well. Um,
Now,
I
the
just,
definition of motifs is that not only are they the smaller pieces worked into a bigger piece
mhm,
project, but they're all worked from center out. So they're
yeah.
not something that's worked in rows. Although I do a lot of squares in back and forth rows, but
Mhm.
that could be considered a motif. But typically, a motif is worked in rounds from the center out.
Mhm. Um, we had talked about, you were giving me some examples before we started about, how we name them and how we think of them is not necessarily the name,
Yeah.
right?
Right. So, way back in the way back when Xerox machines first came out, they were the only photocopier available. I mean, that's all anybody used. So everybody just started calling all photocopies, "Go Xerox that for me."
Mm,
But
mhm,
what what it means is that all Xeroxes are photocopies,
mhm,
but not all photocopies are Xeroxes because there are
mhm.
companies, other companies, or like Kleenex. Kleenex, I actually got myself into trouble in with Etsy because
Oh
I did a
no.
tissue box cover and I used the word Kleenex in the title, and they went,
Oh,
no, and it only took them less than a day to find that. But all Kleenexes are facial tissues. Not all facial tissues are Kleenex. There are
yes.
Puffs and other brands, right? So that's kind of what granny squares are. Granny squares are a special kind of motif. Um, so all
Mhm,
granny squares are motifs,
mhm.
but not all motifs are granny squares.
Right.
Although in my research, I saw someone say, but we've just gotten to the point where a lot of people just say any square is a granny square,
Yeah,
whether
they
it
really
has any
do.
element of the granny square in it.
Yeah.
So does that make it wrong? That's the debate. Does that make it wrong?
It
Probably
depends
not.
on how
It's
legalistic you
just,
want to be. I mean, do
well,
you
again, purist me goes, "Oh, really? Did you just call that a granny square? But that's my opinion. Just,
Well, that
just
and
saying.
we can cringe in the background and let things be, because there's too many people
I don't
on
ever say it out loud except in
right,
this
on
podcast.
cyberspace who have too many opinions about too many things, man. So
Exactly.
Dawn is talking about modified grannies.
Oh, you beat us to it, Dawn.
All right. So we're gonna actually just I'm gonna pop that back up, right?
Yep.
You okay.
Right.
All
So I've
right.
started a project that this is the second year. This is the project I'm actually working on putting together right now that I did last October, and now I'm doing a new one this October, where I invite 11 other designers to design a 12-inch square that is a modified granny. So I feel like the granny square is great and I love it. It's my favorite jam, but there are so many other things you can do with granny stitch, right? So there you can
Mhm.
combine other stitches and other techniques. So what you see on the screen right now on the left is this year's granny stitch. I haven't even put the blanket together yet, but you'll see my square for the granny stitch sampler blanket. And on the right, oh my gosh, Biz's square is absolutely gorgeous. Biz, tell them what you called it.
It's the drama mama.
Yes!
Because when I got
It's
done with
so
it, I was like, this
cool.
is so dramatic.
Yeah,
And I
her style, I love Biz's style because it's so different from mine, yet it's you'll see in the next slide, it's actually pretty similar in some ways, but I tend yeah, so this was our square. These were our squares from last year,
Mhm.
and unbeknownst to us, we didn't even talk about this.
Mm-mm.
I designed mine, she designed hers, and lo and behold, they actually don't use the same stitches,
No.
but the effect is kind of the same.
Yeah, they look
It's
very similar.
crazy. Um, but I've just been on this mission to see how many different ways can I combine things with granny stitches to enhance them, to broaden their appeal, to they're gorgeous stitches. So why they're very simple but very gorgeous. So why not combine them with other things
Right.
and just see what we come up with? And I love experimenting.
Yeah. And for me, when you asked me to do it last year, I was like, how do you make this how do you make a modified granny square? Because quite honestly, that's kind of what I do every day as far as like my blankets are almost all created, center out and they're squares.
Mhm.
So that granny square, like last year especially, it just felt like something I would have done for a blanket, but you can just stop. But
Right.
it's it just allows you to, because it made me then stop and think like the granny stitch. Oh, I've got to get this granny stitch in here. How do I
Right.
make it the star and not detract from it? Because
Mhm.
quite literally, the granny stitch is very much the workhorse, like the workhorse
Yep.
of a design, because it has some it has some flair to it with some holes in it, but it really isn't super fancy. You know what I mean? So a lot of people
Right.
will just use it as a building block for something as opposed
Right.
to it's the star.
Well, there's a reason why a lot of crocheters start their crochet journey with granny squares because even though the concept of working in the round and stitch counts and all of that stuff can be daunting when you're a beginning crocheter,
Mhm.
if you do enough granny squares, you learn even tension.
Mhm.
Your double crochet is the boss.
Oh yeah.
And chains, figuring out how to make them the right tension so that
Mhm.
the spaces create a square rather than something that's a
Yes.
different shape. It's just a workhorse. You're right. And so I've been amazed at some of the ways that my colleagues in the crochet design
Yes.
industry have taken that granny stitch. For instance, one last year, it was nearly the death of every maker of the granny stitch sampler blanket, but it was so totally worth it. One of my best friend colleagues in the business, Erin of Juniper and Oaks, is a
Mhm.
mosaic crochet specialist.
Mhm.
Last year, she figured out a way to make a granny square in mosaic. She took the granny stitch and made it mosaic. And it took me a hot second to figure it out. I'm not going to lie. It was a difficult square, but when I finally figured it out, oh my gosh, it was ridiculously cool,
Yeah.
which just proves
Okay.
that you can do it. There are so many techniques. No one would ever think that mosaic crochet could combine with a granny square.
I would
No
have
one.
never thought of it because as it is, I have a hard enough
Erin did
time
it.
wrapping my mind around how to do mosaic. I mean, like I get the idea of it, but I for the
Mhm.
life of me, I cannot figure out how to like do a pattern of it because I can do other people's, but I can't do my own. I just can't wrap my brain around it.
No, I'm not gonna spend the time because Erin is just too good at it, so I'm just gonna
Right.
let
I mean,
her
you might as
have
well go to the
the
stores, right?
mosaic. Um, one of the things that I love about the granny stitch is being able to combine basic techniques with it. You don't have to get fancy like mosaic
Mhm.
to combine with it. For instance, in our squares, we use now this is a technique that you and I both use, but we get at it in different ways.
Yeah.
You do a single crochet, a back post single crochet, and I
Mhm.
use a third loop
Yes.
single crochet to
Yes.
get that loop that turns over, and it creates this really cool pattern in the square. Another one that I love, and you actually do this, I think you could do this with, you do this in your square,
Mhm.
are the is the spike stitch, the leaf stitch,
Mhm.
going down and combining that with what's below,
Mhm.
and front post stitches,
Mhm.
extended front post stitches,
Mhm.
are really cool for I have a blanket that I use a front post or an extended granny stitch. I don't use front post, but I extend the middle stitch down to 2 rows below, and it
Yeah.
makes it look like a flower in the center of the granny
Yeah.
square.
You can it's a wonderful place to combine stuff, and I double crochet is probably my favorite of all of the stitches just because for me, it's like I have a friend who is just obsessed with half double crochets, and I get it. They're cute. They're fat, cute little things. But I like the double crochet the most because I feel like it gives me the most space to work with. I mean, like single crochets, I
Mhm.
can't, they're hard to go around. If I want to go a
Right.
front or
Yeah, yeah.
back post, the double crochet is just the perfect size.
Yeah, it is. Now the half double crochet, I will say, for me, is probably the easiest one to work in the 3rd loop, so I do use it for that, but I don't
Mm,
generally use it for other stuff because I, like you, love that double crochet, and I'm sure it has a lot to do with the number of granny squares that I've done over my lifetime.
mm.
Thousands. I'm just gonna put it out there. I'm not a young person. Thousands, um, because I love them so much. But as I said, I'm trying to expand my horizons and also use it as a larger design technique than just, "Oh,
Mhm,
here's a granny square." Not that there's
mhm,
anything wrong with that, but
mhm.
here are other ways you can use it.
Yes, and it allows you it just gives you space to play. And I'm always of the mind that I want to either teach you something new or give you something that allows your brain
Mhm.
to be creative when you're making something of mine.
Right.
And so, that's why I love the fact that you've asked me to join you on the last 2 years for the squares is because it allows me to go, "Oh my god, what would I do?" Like and this is how I think
Well, it
because of course
really
of course it is, it's what would I do? But I sit down and I go, "Well, if I was gonna make that, what would I do?" You know? And so
it's a challenge because of the stitch counts. I mean, a
yeah,
granny stitch, basically, if you don't have chain spaces on either side of it, basically a granny stitch is considered multiples of 3.
yeah.
But then depending upon the chain spaces, if you use them and how you use them, it
Mhm.
becomes a different multiple. And so making them fit on the side of a square, so you're not
Mhm.
going, "Oh, I skipped this many stitches over here, but I have no stitches left over here." And
Yes.
making sure it works out with the rest of the techniques that you have in your square, which
Yes.
I applaud you. You're much more adventuresome with your technique choices in your modified granny square than I am. I'm
I
pretty,
just but
predictable.
you gotta give yourself some slack there because you and I have talked about this a couple times that you and I are both learning so much from each other. You had talked about the third loop
Mhm.
versus the back post single crochet. All I'd ever done was the back post single crochet to get that. Never
Yeah.
occurred to me to use the third loop. And now I've
Yeah.
begun to incorporate that in things. So you're branching out and you're using other things. It wasn't something that you were like, oh, I'm going to go crazy and grab a different weird stitch because I love the girl. So, it's
Well,
all
who
about
knows?
learning how to just step out of that comfort zone.
Well, I think I know we're getting off topic a little bit, but this still has to do with modified granny squares. Um, I think it's wonderful how all of us crochet designers sort of feed off of each other. We don't copy
Mhm,
each other.
mhm.
You know my style from Biz's in an instant. There's no
Mhm.
question.
Yeah.
But once I like making your stuff because it gives me a different perspective. It goes, "Oh,
Mm.
yeah, that
Yeah.
works. Oh, I don't think I'm gonna come back to that one anytime soon." And
Mhm.
we start to find new things to do in our own crochet granny
Yes.
squares.
Yes, it allows us to be more creative for sure.
Mhm. Yeah,
I
I
love
like
that.
it.
Alrighty.
Now,
Not
I did find a couple of articles. I'm gonna try to pop them
mhm.
into the description in the YouTube video when we're done, where I got most of my information. And some of it I had seen before, but these two articles really took everything and just kind of put them really well into one article. There's one by the Yarn Queen,
Mhm. I
and
see that.
that's where she did a history of the granny square and trends and that sort of thing. It's a really interesting article. And then there's one by Marcia Makes that she did for Piecework magazine. If you've never seen this magazine, it's a really cool magazine. A lot of quilting and piecework and sewing and things like that. But it's really nice that she did something for granny squares. And the reason that popped up, the URL for this particular article is, "Why is
Yes.
the granny square called a granny square?" I'm going,
Yes.
"Well, honey, you just met me where I was." And so that has some helpful information in it too. And I'll
Oh,
pop those in. They're just really fun articles to read.
yes. I'm gonna have to go read that because, like, the one that you said by Yarn Queen, the very first granny square pattern was by Mrs. Phelps from Prairie Farmer Magazine. Like, she's gonna go into that in depth. It'll just give you a little bit of extra stuff, and we'll get that into our descriptions over the week. But so can we live in harmony? Can motifs and granny squares live in harmony? Are we capable of it? What do you think?
It's gonna take some work on my part. Yes, we can. Um, I cringe in silence, as you know, when someone calls every square piece a
Yeah.
granny square, but I'm gonna let it go. Like I said, these are all our opinions. This is
Yeah,
not
and
the
that's all they
industry
are.
standard. Yeah, it's not like someone on an industry standard panel went, "Nope, that's a granny square. That's not. I don't know why you're calling it that. Stop it." We're not the granny square motif police here.
Yeah,
Um,
stop
so
it.
it's just my opinion. But all that really means, I might judge you in silence. I'm just going to say I might judge you in silence,
With
but I
love,
will
just
never
love
say it
love.
to you, but out of love. But what you won't see is you won't see it in my work.
Yeah.
So my work will either be a traditional basic granny square, or it will be a modified granny square, or it, and I actually don't do motifs because that's just not something I'm interested in.
Mhm.
So, but you do motifs as
Yes,
the start of your square
yes.
blankets.
I start with circles. I start with everything. So I've literally started with little medallions in the center and then made a whole blanket out of that. So
Yep.
yep, it just depends on what your level of how much crazy do you want to do, and how much do you want to push yourself out of a boundary too. I mean, because
Hmm.
it's all about
Hmm.
pushing ourselves and becoming better at what we do,
Yeah.
and the only way that we do that is by just trying new things. So all right, I think we
So
can
I
live in
do
harmony.
think that, well, we can live in harmony. I like it. I hearken back to the statement that all Kleenexes are facial tissue, not all facial tissues are Kleenex.
Yes.
Just,
So all
that's
motifs are not
I'm
granny
just
squares.
gonna well, in my humble opinion, but
Yes,
if
because
you
that was
wanna
kind of the
if
question.
anybody wants to if anybody wants to call their motif a granny square, I am not going to be that person. Oh my goodness, I'm not gonna be that person on social media who goes, "Why are you calling it that? It's not that." It's just because I'm not the queen of all things granny square. I am not. So,
That and
you do
it just
you,
isn't worth it. It is not worth
and
being that
it's not
upset over a granny
nice.
square.
It's totally not nice. I
All right,
like
my
to be
lady.
nice.
We are going to move along because I think we have covered the granny square
We
with
did
our
it.
love. Yes. All right. So, what have you been watching this week?
Oh my goodness. We found a brand new baking show.
Nice.
Other than kind of catching up on network series that are going to come back in October, and the Phillies are finally winning again. So, other than that,
Mhm.
on Netflix, which I only get to watch on the weekends, um, we found a new baking show called the Blue Ribbon Baking Show, and it's based on the state fair. So I grew up in Missouri. You're from Wisconsin, right?
Yes.
Um, where state fairs are like the be all end all. You go, the Northeast tries really hard, but it's not like a good old fashioned Midwestern state fair. I'm
Yes.
sorry. But you
Yes.
go to ride the rides, to see the farm
Mhm.
animals, but you go to eat the food,
Uh-huh.
cotton candy, hot dogs on a stick, all that. And this particular baking show is challenging. It's just like the British baking show where you challenge a group of bakers to
Yes.
do a certain kind of bake, but most of it is cakes. These people have all been blue ribbon winners in their respective states
Mhm.
where
Mhm.
they're from. And
Mhm.
these people
Some are
have
like
some
grand
mad
champions.
skills. They're grand champions. They have mad
Yeah.
skills. And I love it because first of all, it makes me think of growing up in Missouri and going to the fair, but it
Yeah.
also these people are so crazy talented and the judges are so good at
Mhm.
one of the judges is a former pastry chef for the White House. Um, one of them has a bunch of pastry books out. They're just really talented people who
Sandra
are
Lee,
judging it
have
too.
if you've ever heard of her, she's got a lot of cookbooks out on quick meals, and for whatever reason, I used to collect a lot of her cookbooks, but you saying that, that was part of my baby vortex yesterday. Stephanie put on that show,
Did
and
you
we just
watch
sat
it?
there and binged it.
Oh
Yes.
my gosh, are you serious right now? Oh my gosh, it's
Yes, it was
just
so
so
good.
good, so good.
Yes.
In a big old barn.
Yes.
Have all the with these big bright colors, old-fashioned looking,
Yeah.
appliances. I'm like, "Oh gosh, this is just so cool." And I think if I'm looking at this correctly, they actually set up a faux fairgrounds outside the
They
barn
did.
to make it look like oh, it's just so cool. I
It
love
is,
it.
it's very fun. And
Mhm.
I think the thing that I liked about it, because I like most of the baking shows, but so many of them follow the same format and it's the same thing over and over again. And this one is just different. And it's very fun. And they're not doing the same bakes that every other single show is doing. They're
Uh-huh.
taking and making really interesting um, challenges and stuff like that. So I think that's what I enjoyed the most about it.
Yeah. So that's basically what we've been watching, and the only reason I can only do that on weekend is because I don't subscribe to Netflix, but my daughter does. So when
Mhm.
she's home for the weekend, um, I get to use her account.
Yeah, I know. I use
No
my daughter's
pirating
too.
here. Just
But,
saying. What have
I
you been watching?
other than the baking show yesterday, we've been doing a lot of Everybody Loves Raymond, that's bedtime TV. What else? I know and if you are on Prime, there is, something called Barbecue Brawl, and the first season of it is if you've ever watched any kind of barbecue competitions, I don't know what it is about the judges. They're always like, "You better give me the best barbecue you've ever made." And it sounds like they're gonna come over there and rip your arm off and beat you with it if you don't.
Well, it almost sounds like WWE for barbecue.
It is, and so the first season, they've got a couple of barbecue masters as the judges, and that's kind of the way that they talk to the people, and it is just so aggressive. And that one didn't have a lot of episodes, but the second season starts the fun version of it, which it goes for another two. It's still going, but it's got Carson Kressley and Brooke. I can't remember what her name is, and then there's another guy who's a barbecue master, and they're just more fun personalities. And it's Bobby Flay and Michael Simon started, if you watch any of the food shows. And then each season they bring in a different kind of celebrity cook or chef, and then they work in teams, and it's
Mhm.
so much fun. The only thing that drives me crazy is Bobby Flay wins everything. I swear to God, it's rigged because he's. I'm sorry. I look at some of the food and I go, that other person's was way better. He does the exact same thing every time he cooks. I am not a Bobby Flay fan.
I'm very sorry for you. He's got a commercial out now where he's barbecuing and dancing, so
Oh no, that
maybe
needs to
that's his thing
stop.
now.
I don't know what it is.
All right. How do you really feel about Bobby Flay?
I know. I always go overboard. Sorry. Sorry if I offended anybody who likes Bobby Flay.
Okay. Well, it's the same kind of discussion we had for our episode today. It's like in silence, we say
Exactly. Yes, I have no opinion about Bobby
we
Flay.
think it. Too late. It's
He blasted it all over the internet. Oh my
yeah.
gosh.
Did you see what they said at the end of that episode? Oh my gosh.
I know. And whenever you get the internet trolls and they're like, yeah, well, what were you doing on your couch? You weren't out there making the food. You're right, I wasn't. Not my passion. And I still have an opinion about it.
Oh my gosh. You're killing me.
Oh my God.
All right.
We should probably
We're
let
fine.
people go.
We'll continue this discussion on our own. That was awesome. No, no, thanks everybody for hearing us out about this
Yes.
great debate, the Granny Square versus the Motifs. It's really not a debate. It's really not a big deal. It's just it actually helped me to do research on it. But you can have your own opinion, and we will
Absolutely.
gladly accept that.
And we will support you 100%.
Exactly.
Now, next week, hope you guys come back. We're going to be shifting our gears just a little bit. We're going to just kind of have some fun in the month of September, just because we've been so focused on, themes, and we just don't want to overdo it. So next week, Friday, Miss Deb here has got some fun stuff planned. What is our topic?
Oh, wait, is that the one where we're doing, is it National Read a Book Day?
Yes, it is National Book Day.
Yay. Okay, which means this weekend I read all the time. This is not an issue. I have a book by Sutton Foster called Hooked. She wrote a book about her life and how crochet saved her life. I started following her on Instagram, and she keeps posting about projects that she starts when she starts a new show.
Oh,
So
neat.
yeah, so I'm going to try to go back and read it again before next week's episode. And we're just going to be talking about crochet for book readers and and what our favorite books are and what our favorite genres are, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and just so I'm just getting out my planner here, just so you guys have an idea of what we're going to be tackling in the month of September. We're going to be doing an episode about some Halloween and spooky stuff. We're going to do
on Friday the 13th.
And we're going to do some crochet skills this month. We're going to be talking about frogging specifically. And then the end of the month is National Ancestry Day. So if you've got a story that you would like for us to share about how you got started in crochet, and we'll be happy to talk about it. So make sure you email either Deb or myself. And you can find that information on either one of our websites. And just let us know, how did you get started crocheting? Or if you want to reach out to us on social media as well, we're always there.
Yep.
But yeah, I think it's going to be a fun month.
I do too.
All right, everybody, you guys have an amazing weekend. I'm going to let you go. We are going to stop the crazy and go have a soda.
Sounds good to me.
Bye.